Hi, folks. Nick Tockert here with the Historical Fencing Guild. Before we get into it, I do have a few things to work on. We want to acknowledge our good friends over at the Independent Creator Directory. That's IndieCD.org, your one-stop shop for the best and the brightest authors, artists, and musicians. We're also made possible by sales of the Simple Sword, the Fighting Axe, and the Simple Spear, all part of our ongoing series of Western martial arts manuals designed to help you go from having never handled the sword to teaching the art to others. And IndieCD Con, which will be held not September, that's a different convention. March 7th, 2026 in lovely Fowler, Indiana, where you can meet me, a bunch of other great creatives, have a wonderful time. All righty. It's free to attend, by the way, just to let you know. Now, today we're going to come on. I was going to pre-record, and my son was very sick. That means I wasn't able to, so that gets you some resubmitted questions. So what happened is I asked around for questions, and my viewers gave them to me. One of them was, am I going to keep reviewing Purple Heart Armory, keeping track for good deals? Yes, I will. Right now, they have a Dobsong Mue trainer for Krabi Krabong, and it is running at $27.95. That's a pretty good sword for a pretty good price for that much sword. And I am seriously tempted to see if I can't get Suba thrown on there and basically the rubber band stopper to see if it would work as a Nagamaki. So we're going to do that. I will, of course, be responding to people's comments as they come in, should they come in. All right. Let me see. Which of these do I want to get into first? Because I got a good selection of questions. So let's see. Right now, I've had a couple that were asking about a gear shortage. And there is indeed, it seems like a lot of things have run out lately. Let me move this. I don't want that to trigger anything. Cool. And part of it has been the shipping difficulties due to the whole tariff fiascos. And part of it is a lot of the kind of gear we have been using for quite some time has been bought up by, I suspect, interested parties who are finding need of protective torso armor and hand and basically joint protection that works in a non-ballistic situation, a hopefully non-ballistic situation. It can be hard to find, again, what we have been using traditionally. Now, there's also been an increase in price across the board in many of the products of the stores, again, due to supply and demand issues and due to just trying to keep a hold of stock. Things got kind of spicy for a while, and they still are. So that may be a major issue and an ongoing one. Now, what we may find is the wisest course is to see and acknowledge that we may have to take a step back and go back to crafting our own gear. And that goes, I'm skipping ahead down the line because I think it's connected. But we are at a point where to keep doing what we do, we have to start looking back and I think borrowing from the SCA heavy fighter traditions of homemade armor, homemade gear as much as humanly possible. There are some great options that can be adjusted or adapted. I have fought in a lot of sports gear. I still think lacrosse gloves are some of the best gloves you can use for what we do. I do think that there's some artificial inflation in the cost of some of the gear. And my chief argument, my chief point of watching this situation happen with the gears I've been monitoring for some time, some real safety issues. And I've talked to you guys about it. The safety issues are pieces of gear just failing. Supposedly production, tested, reliable and trustworthy brands, their gear is failing. Now, part of it, I feel, is people are using gear that does not match how they're fighting and is not sufficient for the style they're fighting in. This is a major, major issue. When I was a light fighter, I found that to be a tremendous issue. I still think it's an issue, but I haven't really looked and see if their rule set has moved forward much. I may have to go back through it and just look. But for what we do, and a lot of groups use different gear, I prefer the polypropylene trainers. I'm still looking for something with the kind of flexibility you get out of metal, but you're not going to find it easily or inexpensively. But I do believe it's a necessary option. Now, if you go digging around in some old, hoary, dark places of the internet that yours truly remembers from when they were not nearly so old and hoary, like the Armor Archive, you can find SCA-designed metal armor patterns, which if you have access to sheet metal, if you have access to possibly even aluminum, you can, and some basic tools, you can start to make your own fully functional gear. I've known people who've made very good gauntlets and things for many years through patterns that were passed down from that tradition. I am planning in the very near future to attempt to adapt said patterns from where we were being, strictly steel to something more malleable, something more viable for what we're doing, which in my case would either be aluminum or HDPE. I would love to make some really nice HDPE gauntlets. And I am looking at different options on how to do that. Because for me, getting the joinery right will be the hardest aspect. And I think going through this process will, I don't want to phrase this. Okay, sometimes to understand how a car drives, you have to reinvent the wheel. Not that you can't, through your own, through research, find this information, but finding information and essentially discovering it for yourself to an extent is a very different and important thing to look at. Because when you make it yourself and you wear the stuff based on period, many times you can figure out why they did something that way. And contrary to the belief that the historical uh, fighters were, just barbaric, club dragging Neanderthals, they and the artisanal craftsmen who made the gear that they used were highly skilled and highly advanced. So we have to go and look at it not just from the perspective of someone who is wearing the gear and doing what they do, but from the perspective of someone who is wearing gear, doing what they do, but have access to modern technology, modern materials. So what we can do is go, this is how they would have done it. Groovy. How would they have done it if they had access to our materials? Because we're not just studying them to preserve the history. I love history. Do not ever get me wrong. But this is not an authenticity challenge. If you want something like that, there are groups that do that. And it is very impressive. It is mind-blowing. But this is practical application in a very realistic setting. So, I'm sorry, my nose itches so bad. I got a little scratch. But this could be accomplished and dealt with by remembering what we're trying to achieve, right? Which, for the vast majority of what we are doing, is to prevent impact and sustaining damage from the force that is being used against us. And just like in the real world, where arms and armor are constantly in a race, you have the same thing going on in training. This is why we have to go into the guts, the bonehead level physics first, to understand what we are accomplishing, to then look at materials that would work with it and what the challenges of those materials are. So if we're going through traditional leather, rivets, and steel, be it mild or stainless, although stainless is a little easier to work with in certain aspects, obviously, how do we deal with certain problems of use? For example, if you use aluminum on aluminum, it tends to bind. Aluminum likes to get stuck to itself. So even if you did aluminum plates, you better make sure that those rivets, one, you don't want to use aluminum rivets, they're too weak. And two, you don't want to use something that will stick. So you're probably going to use copper rivets if you have any sense. Solid copper rivets, and then leather, and then aluminum. I've seen sabatons done very nicely in aluminum. I've seen greaves. I've seen Wisby plate that's polished in aluminum. Now, why are we saying aluminum? In this case, aluminum, aluminium, whatever, is lighter and it doesn't rust. It does oxidize, but it doesn't rust. This makes it much nicer for long-term play compared to our buddy mild steel. Now, never let it be said I have any beef with mild steel. I love me some mild steel. Mild steel is sturdier. It is stronger. It is safer to work with from the perspective of heat treatments and forging. The fumes that you're dealing with are radically safer. And it's simpler in many ways to work with. Plus the shape retention, especially if you use the right kind of steel and the right thicknesses of steel for what you're doing, you start to get somewhere with it. Now, I've got some experience doing armoring with leather and with aluminum and with galvanized steel, which you really don't want any heat applications with. That's nasty chemicals coming off of that. But the other thing you can look for is brass. Brass is softer than both, basically. But it's very nice. It's malleable. It's pretty. It doesn't corrode. It oxidizes, due to the copper in it. You get a kind of greenish patina kind of thing going, but not like you get with the speed of rust damaging the material. All your iron-based ferrous goodies do that. But this is where you start going, do we want to reinvent the wheel or not? So what we can do is that's where we start looking at resources, historical resources. Absolutely. Look at modern historical resources. Again, however you may feel about the SCA, okay? The heavy side and the armoring side, depending on who you talk to, have incredible resources and knowledge. And that's one thing about having a living history style group who is recreating these techniques and living them. You figure out why things happen. Now, I do not play with that club anymore, largely because I didn't like the LARP aspect of it. That's right. I'm sure I just offended some people, but that's okay. However, the knowledge that some of those individuals have, especially those in the arts and sciences, and I consider armoring to be a little bit of both, you can find some truly amazing information. And it is also very, very good to dig around because you can start to find the rough patterns they used, the rough information they laid out. So you don't have to start from zero. Now, years ago, for example, I started doing my own gorgets. And I'm going to need to make some new ones. So I'm going to gather the materials and do them. Since I now have, hold on. Yep, that is the typical high level prestige and respecting it. But I now have this little rig. And this little rig is my best friend when it comes to a very select job. That being able to take my webcam and mount it relatively quickly, facing down, so that you can watch me work on things. I may have to adjust what table I'm working at. I may have to slide a workbench. I may even have to make my own small workbench to be able to work in here and have something sturdy enough, because this is all being held up by a fairly lightweight plastic folding table that has been my desk for a while now. So it's not really the best idea to be hammering on. But I'm going to show that. We're going to talk about fitting uh, plastrons to ourselves and realizing that they can easily be made. Back of the head protectors. Relatively simple geometric shape. It's an oval that is dished a bit, but most importantly curved on one axis. Since a lot of people use HDPE barrels, the blue barrels you see floating around, as one of their primary sources of material to build this type of low cost, budget friendly armor, you can go with that. I talk about gloves a lot because I would like to make some clamshells to go over a set of lacrosse gloves, just to add safety, because I am an artist who has hand damage. So I need to make sure my hands are very safe. Now, when they are behind a cup hilt rapier, so a Tizona, a Caribe, a basket hilted anything, they're pretty safe. A lightsaber hilt rig like this is moderately safe, but not where I want to be, per se, even with lighter gloves. However, a wider saber hilt, which I don't have now, I've made in the past, kicking around here somewhere, is actually the one I made out of, I want to say mild steel. In the past, it was very hard for me to cut material because it's loud, my timing couldn't work. Now I am in possession of a throatless Beverly shear. Not by Beverly, I couldn't afford that, but a bootleg. And that is a device that allows one to cut fairly abstract shapes in metal that I could then dish, which is basically ding to a shape I want. And I need to make a dishing block. Or I can even use just to cut out flat plates for different, I have a very nice gambeson. It was not made by Specs. It was not made by, it's a cheap gambeson. Honestly, it's a cheap gambeson I think I got from Medieval Collectibles. But it takes damage well. I mean, it absorbs impact. That's what it's meant to do. We are not using sharp implements. Anything that is steel that we would use will have a rubber blunt on the end per SCA light rules. And any fencing swords we use will have a blunt on the end. No, I don't mean that kind. I mean like a rubber stopper. They make specialized little rubber end caps. But between the cost of materials, the cost of acquisition, and the necessity, I just have to find a way to get the materials and do it myself. And as I do it, I want to share it with you guys to make it as cost friendly as possible. This is one of those where I do not encourage piracy. It would be unlawful for me to encourage piracy. However, one can go to museums, one can look in books, one can look at retail items and go, oh, maybe that's how they did it. The other thing is, it is not fair to compare the items someone who is just getting into armoring can make with, the masterworks you often find in museums, because unfortunately, the gear that is used by the wealthiest and most important people who have all the money and resources, gets preserved in museums, whereas the gear of the common man, which wasn't, treated as well historically often is not preserved as well for museum or our study. But you can guarantee it's going to be of a simpler, probably sturdier or as sturdy design. It's like when people bring up the simple Dusseks and compare them to Messers or sabers or whatever. They were essentially a machete. Okay? That they found a simple way to put a guard on using basic techniques that just about every blacksmith knew. Because blacksmiths, when you look into blacksmithing as a skill set, and if you're going to do metalworking, you should start, at least in part, with understanding practical blacksmithing. How do they make hinges? How do they make hooks? Understanding how they make hooks gives you the skill set. It starts to give you the pieces that you could then use the same techniques to make riggings, to make cross guards. Which is why over the spring and summer, I hope, should my hands and everything hold out, to both get back into blacksmithing and learn rudimentary stick welding. Yep, because it is my dream to make my own swords. At least a decent knife, but swords, it's a passion. I also want to make just cool things, useful things that can help, shepherd's hooks and things. Reuse materials I find into things that are useful for me or others. And to do so with as much, how do I put this? Do so with as much self-sufficiency as possible. Because you never want to do anything for just one reason. So that's where we're going. Other questions. Am I ever going to throw knives again? Yes, this spring. Will I do archery? That's a great question. I do have bows, multiples, and I do have a few targets, and I can get others, again, relatively cheaply. My problem is making sure the backstop is set up and that it is safe to do so. However, due to some local situations that the property next door especially has been going through, it is wiser for me to limit my oddities if possible. And, especially with things that make others and law enforcement agencies nervous. So I have to be careful with this. I have seen how quickly a miscommunication, misunderstanding, or malicious intent can convince others that what I'm doing is not what I'm actually doing. It's, something nefarious. And I don't wish to repeat that. One learns. That being said, I am hoping again this spring, if all goes well, to begin training at least if they show up at Grimm, working with them. And a few of my older students are basically begging for me to open back up. They want me and my house back up. So it would be in everyone's best interests for me to get my crud together, sort out the illnesses I'm dealing with, and get back into form. So that is stuff I have been working on dramatically behind the scenes. Why not greatsword? Okay. I get a lot of questions. Nick, why don't you just understand that longsword, greatsword, and usually Meyer are the best? I don't find longsword comfortable. I just don't. Very often it is a game of leverage and strength, and I am not very tall, and my arms aren't terribly long. So it becomes a losing game very quickly for me. Now, I do have some background in two-handed swords, and I can make them go, certainly. But they are not, and likely never will be, my preference. I do love them. I love all swords. Not equally, but I do love them all. And likewise, why do I like Spanish? Okay, let's talk about this one. This is a great question. I appreciate the person asking it. Why do I like Spanish? I have malformed ankles, severely damaged knees, severely damaged, possibly malformed, and bone spur ridden hips. My spine is malshaped. Malshaped, malformed. There are bone spurs there. There is a disc, etc. there. What does that have to do with anything? The way I move very often is in a style of necessity. I walk the way I walk because that's what I have to do to be able to walk. It's not a strut, it's not a swagger, it's not usually a full-on limp, but it is necessary. That means, for me, an upright position is very comfortable. A fairly laid-back position is doable. Who doesn't love a little gigante? The problem is an aggressive or an extremely aggressive bent position, which does, in fact, give you more lateral reach at the loss of balance and mobility in certain cases. I am not physically comfortable, at times capable of performing. And I've spent a quarter of a century making adaptations for other people so that they could fight. It is only fair that I allow myself the adaptations I need so that I can fight. For example, I am studying the different cooling systems that could be worn under armor for the safety of myself and my students, as we don't have an indoor air-conditioned site to do what we do. Had I a vast sum of money, I would simply buy a property next door, have it bulldozed flat, put a large garage-like barn entity there, a nice chunk of parking lot, and then we would go out and we would fight our little hearts out inside an air-conditioned, nicely lit, incredibly high-ceilinged building. It would be my guild hall, and it would be glorious. However, I have yet to hit the lotto, and neither have any of my students. Cup hilts? Well, part of it is that's the tool you use in Spanish. Part of it is, again, I am an artist. And I'm a passionate artist, a dabbling musician, and I am a craftsman of assorted tinkery things. A factotum, if you will. I require the use of my hands. And in fact, since I've had to recover from the traumatic nerve injury that I incurred, I had to work for several years to regain reasonably functional use of my hands. I'm going to protect them. Which is why I am still actively seeking rigs like my Korea Bay, the Bilbo, or a Tizona, or even some of the small swords if they have a keyhole grip and adequate protection. I crafted a trainer. It is downstairs that meets most of my criteria. It still needs some tweaking, but it meets most of them. And that's saying something. Um, I basically turned a Jin trainer into a light rapier smallsword. I'm still quite proud of the work I did on that. And you will probably, when I have finished the projects that I am doing fairly presently, see it again. It is one of the best suited trainers for me, and I had to vastly modify it to make it function. And I'm okay with that. I may buy another one or take one similar just to literally lock the blade off, cut it down into a tang, and build out like I were building a lifesteal sword, but with mostly polypropylene. Uh, Polypropylene light and our good buddy HDPE for things like the scales and the guard. So that's what I'm planning to do. That's where I'm considering going with that. I still, while they are far from perfect, the polypropylene rapiers that are actually like hexagonal, essentially plastic blades with a ball on the end are the safest and best trainers I have found, with the only caveat being that they get awful wibbly during the heat of summer, and I haven't quite found the right workaround for that. Always working to move forward, to come up with better ideas for you to save you money. But can I longsword? Mostly. Can I greatsword? A greatsword to me is often a longsword to many of my colleagues. The matter of when I train, formative years, I trained with a lot of people well over 6 foot tall, me being between 5'5" and 5'7", depending on what my hip joint and everything is doing on any given day. Gave me a bit of a complex. But if there is enough spoken interest, I can go back. Yes, I did do some boken work, not kendo, although I played with some kendoka folks. I played with a lot of folks. That's how I got where I am. But I had a book on training with the boken when I was a very young man, because I encountered a program called Tenchi Muyo. Yeah, we're going to get out into the long, dark, shady side of the soul when, tweenage Nick was running about the woods, having hand carved a wooden sword, boken kind of thing, with to protect the wood, as I did not have access to wax to seal it, or I'm sorry. Oh no, I have it somewhere, a relic of my past, but I used Irish spring soap and just rubbed it in till it sunk into the wood. The thing, last time I saw it, still had a faint blue cast and smelled rather refreshing. Oh, but I found the only book I could find on sword fighting, and it spoke of how to use a bokken and things. Very Aikido adjacent at a library. I cannot remember the title. I wish I could. It's one of those that somebody else stole from the library because it was sword related, and they refused to buy a new copy. But that's also part of when I fell in love with Joe Staves. So yeah, I am not an Aikido guy. I have never studied Aikido. I just keep bumping into it sideways. Like I'm reinventing the wheel and I roll right into bumping into Aikido. So it interests me. I did some Iaido though. And that again was many, many years ago. I dabble enough to go yes, no, get a feel for it and move on, not knowing that that was a rampant sign of neurodivergence. But it means I can now make any sword go in an ugly but mostly effective style. I have won every knife fight I've been in, and I have survived and won. I've survived every live steel sword fight I've had to deal with. So that's saying something. Yeah. So I hope that answers that question. Let's see what else we got. Talked about Spanish, talked about the gear, talked about any single style, talked about materials and necessity, which I may set up hopefully as a pre-recorded video. I just had to deal with the fact my son was very sick this week, and that required my attention. Let's see. Oh, yeah. I will be working on designing a back of the head protector based on some designs I've seen. As that's developed, I will let you guys know. Oh, yes, I do actually have an Amazon wish list that I can share. Somebody remind me. I'll make sure it's all set up next week, and I'll put it up there for people who want to order me stuff. I don't quite know how that's all going to work, but we will certainly give it a shot. Eventually, I'd love to get a PO box so that people can send me things to test and review. In the event of me receiving funds and not having a calamity, I do intend to try to get a formerly Italian tactical side sword trainer, like a Mark II, done by our good friends over at PHA. We're just going to have to see on that one. I know this is a kind of spicy time for a lot of us. It's a little on the odd, but it is, however, a great time to start laying down the groundwork so that when the weather is cooperative, we can do more. Do all the prep work now. And I'm going to go over and refresh what are the easiest types of armor to make. And we'll go over that. Okay, what, cost effective and ease, if that is something you're still interested in. Let me see. I've gone through all of that. The chat has been quiet, but you have been present. I can see the viewers watching. Thank you for your time. Looks like I covered everything the Ask Me Anything folks answered. So thank you guys for answering those. We are again, as of tomorrow, a month away from IndieCD, a free author and creative convention held in Fowler, Indiana, that my lovely wife and I run. That will be from 10 till 8. March 7th, which always sneaks up on me. March is a very, very busy month for me. I have a convention that we run and both my wife and my son's birthdays. So it is a very, very broke time in my life, which is why I'm kind of... But All that having been said, we're coming along. Things are going better. I'm still doing my drills. I'm still using those wolf head sabers. I think that's called wolf head sabers. They changed names a couple times. Wu Jiao. They're a bit on the heavy side and a bit unbalanced, which I like because it forces me to maintain edge alignment during my evening drills. I will be altering and renewing some of my physical therapy, starting possibly tonight if my body is up to it. Beyond that, guys, I think we've had a good, solid discussion. Everyone seems to have been, at least that's been contacting me here, dealt with. So if you are watching this later, please leave a comment. I'll happily answer them. Like, share, and subscribe as always. And keep your guard up. Keep your eyes open. Be kind to yourself and each other. And as always, thank you for supporting your local swordmaster. I will be back for folks watching on this channel next week at the same time. Will either be a pre-recorded or a live broadcast, depending on interest and availability. Thank you guys for giving me some time off and tolerating the situation I had. I had severe technical difficulties hit because of the weather and my local internet service provider kind of having some issues, combined with some, we'll say, personal issues that took a lot out of me. There were some injuries, and I need to be careful not to let my you can't pour from an empty cup, and mine got way too dry for a while there. I'm still being careful with it. I'm still monitoring it and being moderate about it, but that's where I stand there. So guys, I will see you all next week over there. And for my people on Kick and my people on Twitch, whom I love, you'll see me over, just like the folks who are on the Nicholas Tucker YouTube channel, my other channel. I have to keep this channel separate because YouTube gets kind of funny about this subject matter. But I'll be over there as, Monday morning at 10 for Nevermind the Furthermore, my morning talk show. Okay, guys. Well, with that, I'm calling it. Stay safe out there, okay?